Okay, this video is a follow-up to my previous HDRI lighting tutorial. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend watching that one before you watch this one, and you can find a link to it in the description below. In this video, I want to respond to a question that was asked regarding how to place objects in the scene and have them cast shadows as if the HDRI was actual model geometry. So let's get into it. First, I went to the Polyhaven site and downloaded this HDRI image. I got the 4K HDR because I'm just using it for the lighting information, not for the background image. For the background image, I clicked this 3D button and then rotated around until I found a view that I liked. Then I clicked this button here in the corner to enlarge. Then I hit the print screen button on my keyboard. Then I opened a new document in Photoshop, hit Ctrl-V to paste the image. Then I cropped it down a little bit and saved the image. If you don't have Photoshop, there are other options like Krita or GIMP. These are both just like Photoshop, except they are free to download and use. I'll put links to both in the description below, as well as Fspy, which is a free camera matching program that you're going to need. So just go to the site, scroll down to the green download button, and then download the Fspy Setup exe file. You'll also need the Fspy add-on for Blender, so go back up to the main page, scroll down and click on Official Fspy Importer Add-on, and scroll down to Download Latest Version, then download the Fspy Blender zip file. I already have Fspy installed, so I'm going to open it and then drag and drop the image that I saved out of Photoshop. The first thing you'll notice are these red and green lines that are also numbered. Red is 1, green is 2. And if you look over here, you'll see that the red lines represent the x-axis and the green lines represent the y-axis. So what you want to do is position the green lines along some defined edges in the photo to set the perspective in the y direction. Then I'm going to line up the red lines vertically. Since these lines are vertical, I'm going to change this to Z, and you see now they turn blue, and you see the UCS icon with the Z pointing up. One other thing you can do here is enable the floor grid. You can move that around and see how it lines up. And you can also disable this dim image so you can see the image better. And once you're happy with it, go to File, Save As, give it a name, and hit Save. And that will create an Fspy project file that you can import into Blender. I already have a file saved out, so I'm going to close out of this and jump into Blender. Okay, to begin with, you'll need to install the Fspy add-on. So go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install, and then browse to the location of your add-ons, select the Fspy Blender zip file, and install add-on. Once it's installed, click the checkbox to enable it, save preferences, and you're ready to go. Now you can go to File, Import, Fspy, and browse to the location of your Fspy file, and then Import Project File. This will create a camera and load your background image for you. And if you go to camera properties, you can see the field of view has been set to match the background image. But the image is a little faded, so go to Background Images and set opacity to 1. And then if you hit the Home key on your keyboard, that will fill the viewport with your camera view. Now you need to load the HDRI image. So go to World Properties, click the yellow dot next to Color, Environment Texture, and Open. Then browse to the location of your HDRI that you downloaded, which is this one here. Go to Render Properties and select Cycles and come down to Film and enable Transparent. Now you need to set up some objects to use as Shadowcatchers. For this scene, I need a plane for the ground and a cylinder for this column. So Shift A, add a cylinder, and then scale it and move it so that it covers the column, and then drag it down so that the bottom of the cylinder matches up with the bottom of the column. Then Shift A again and add a plane and move it down until it just starts to intersect with the bottom of the cylinder. Then hit Tab, switch to Edit Mode, and start stretching the plane out to cover the area where you're going to place your models. To do this, you'll probably need to jump in and out of camera mode, so hit 0 on your number pad to jump out of camera mode. And then you can hit 0 again to jump back into camera mode. And just keep doing that until you have the plane covering the area where you want your models. You can also hit Alt-Z, switch to transparency mode to make it easier to see where you need to drag your edges out to. And then Alt-Z again to turn transparency off. Now I'll hit Tab, switch back to object mode, select the cylinder, tab back into edit mode, then Alt-Z for transparency, and I'm going to delete the top and bottom end caps. Now I'll switch to vertex mode, and I'm going to stretch this up higher. Now I'll tab back to object mode, right click, and shade smooth. Then I'll switch to render preview mode. I'll go to object properties, down to visibility, and enable Shadowcatcher. This will make the cylinder invisible, but you can still click on it to select it if you need to. Next, I'll go to the plane and do the same thing. Object properties, visibility, and Shadowcatcher. Now you can see if you click on the cylinder, it's a little bit bigger than the column, so you might need to make some adjustments, scale it down a little bit to get it to fit perfectly, but just minor tweaks that you might have to do. Anyway, that's it for the scene setup. Now you can start adding your models. I'm going to switch to a file that I already created where I added some characters. I scaled them up to match the scene by placing one of them back here by these doors, and then I scaled him up until he looked about the right height in relation to the door. Then I scaled all the rest of them up to match. I also added these two guys back here running across the bridge, and I placed another shadow catcher in front of them to block out the lower half of their bodies. And since I added this column here, I can place this guy behind it, and then he gets partially blocked by the column, which is pretty cool. Now, when I first added these guys, their shadows didn't match up with the shadows in the image. So I had to rotate the HDRI to get the character shadows to match the direction of the HDRI shadows. I already discussed how to do that in my other HDRI lighting video, so you can watch that one to see how it's done. But if I switch to the shading tab, you can see here that I rotated the HDR -4 degrees. And that was enough to get the character shadows to line up with the HDRI shadows. So yeah, that's the basic idea. Once you have your camera set up with your background image and your HDRI loaded and rotated to match the image, just add some primitive objects to use as shadow catchers and then start placing models in the scene. Now, in terms of rendering, here are some of the main settings that I use. Under Render Properties, I set the device to GPU Compute. And down here under Sampling, under Render, I set the max samples to 400 because the default 4096 is just ridiculously high. I turn on Denoise. Down here under Light Paths, these are the settings I use because, again, the default settings are just too high. Caustics, these are on by default. You want to turn them off. You typically don't need them, and they do increase render time. Then down here under Color Management, I set the look for this image to medium high contrast. There are others you can choose from, but this one seemed to work the best for this image. Next, I come over to Output Properties, and the original image resolution for X and Y was 1626 by 1080, so I doubled it to 3252 by 2160 to get more resolution in the image. Otherwise, the soldiers would be really pixelated. And for the output, I chose TIFF for the file format with RGBA and 8-bit color depth. So now if you hit F12 to start the render, you'll see that only the objects you placed in the scene get rendered, along with the lighting and shadows, with no background image. To get the background image back, you can close this window, switch to the Compositing tab. You want to click Use Nodes. Then you can hit N to close this sidebar and right-click to close the timeline. Then drag out a new window and set it to Image Editor. Then you want to click this down arrow and you want to search for Render Result. But you might have a lot of stuff in this window, so if you type R in the search box, now you can find it. Now in the node editor, hit Shift A and add a Composite node, and then Shift A again, add a Render Layers node, and connect the image output to the image input. Next, hit Shift A again and add an image node, and click Open and select the backdrop image that you used in the rendering. Now hit Shift A again and add an Alpha Over node. And you want to put that one in between the render layers and the composite. You want this image output to plug into the bottom image input, and you want this image output to plug into the top image input. And now we got our background back. Except you can see that it doesn't match up. And that's because I changed my resolution image. So I need to add another node. So Shift A and add a scale node and change it to render size, and then stick it right in here. And now it matches up. Now, one more thing you could do, Shift A and add an RGB curves. And then you can add a little bit of contrast to that background image and make it match up a little bit better. Or you could add a brightness contrast node or a hue saturation node or whatever. I have a material setup video that covers all of that if you're interested. So now just come up to the image menu, do a save as, and then just give it a name and save it. Okay, that's about it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and post them below. And as always, if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.